IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Dear listeners, a very short portion of this interview had to be cut out because it was possible that it would flout Indian laws. Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. Trolling on social media is a serious and menacing problem. It has gone far beyond just heckling and whataboutery. Trolls now threaten violence and worse. Women, especially activists, journalists, academics, and celebrities, routinely face threats to them and even their family. Professor Audrey Truschke is a historian of South Asia and associate professor at Rutgers University who has been attacked ceaselessly for her allegedly anti-Hindu views. She writes about Hindu-Muslim relations during the Mughal Empire, and a book on Aurangzeb have made her what one can call a troll magnet, rousing the ire of Hindutva groups and in the US as well as in India. She routinely mentioned this on her Twitter account, which I suppose, as she may tell us, provokes the critics and haters even more. She joins us on this podcast to talk about how and why she is being attacked and how she deals with it. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Dr. Truschke.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So, first question is, when exactly did these online attacks begin?
My first brush with online trolling occurred in 2015. At that point, I was just about to come out with my first book, Culture of Encounters. And I gave an interview to The Hindu, the newspaper, in which I said all these things that I thought were edgy and controversial and provocative about the Mughal Emperor Akbar. No one cared. I've still never heard from a single living soul about my provocative views on Emperor Akbar. In that same interview, I said two short sentences about the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb Alamgir. Now, those two sentences were completely unobjectionable from a historian's viewpoint, but as I painfully learned, they were very objectionable from the viewpoint of much of the Indian public. And so I felt like the world exploded at me in the 5 to 7 days, roughly, following the publication of that interview. However, compared to what I receive now, that hate mail, my first brush, looks like a mere trickle.
Yeah, so that was my next question. Did these attacks and hate-mongering change in tone and tenor over the years?
Yes and no. I would say overwhelmingly no, the tone has not changed. I'll never forget one of the earliest very hateful trolling messages I got back in 2015 or 2016 was a wish that I be sent to the death camps run by Hitler. Pure, unadulterated anti-Semitism. I continue to receive such severe anti-Semitism today. Misogyny is by far the most common genre of hate mail that I receive, and that's always been there. And in fact, that is part of what makes me a target. I'm the wrong gender, according to Hindu nationalists.
Yeah, well, women get the worst of it. There is no question about that. Even those who are not particularly offensive, I say this in quotes, to the Hindu element or Hinduism or Hindutva for that matter. Did the threats of violence come in just individual bursts, or did they look like an organized campaign?
That has depended on the time and the sort of exact series of attacks that was ongoing. And so that's the sense in which the hate mail has changed. There have been highs, there have been lows, there have been moments that appear a bit more grassroots, and then there have been moments that are clear BJP IT cell and adjacent coordinated attacks. And in terms of making sense of that and exactly when the attacks come and why, sometimes there is an obvious catalyst. Publishing a biography of the most hated Indian Muslim in history was an obvious catalyst when my biography of Aurangzeb Alamgir came out in 2017. Other times, such as this past March of 2021, when I faced a series of virulent and coordinated attacks, there was no obvious catalyst for that. That was much more of a targeted hit job that, from my perspective, appears to have been done based on the timing of Hindu nationalists and Hindu supremacist groups.
And also the fact that Hindutva groups in India as well as in the US have kind of become more active in terms of going after people. Suddenly, I seem to notice.
I think that's definitely true. And I think that's explained by a couple of things. Certainly, the increasing stranglehold that Hindutva has over Indian politics has emboldened a lot of people. It is a dangerous and a fierce thing when bigotry that people were ashamed of before comes out into the light of day. And we are seeing that ongoing as India's Hindu nationalist government continues with their assault on human rights, on religious minorities in India, and generally trying to turn what was the world's largest democracy into an authoritarian state and a Hindu Rashtra. Somewhat separately, but possibly emboldened by that, I have seen a significant uptick, especially in the last 8 months, from United States-based groups. And I think at this point, speaking for myself personally as a scholar who researches Hindu nationalism to some degree, I think that this is a form of US-based hate now as well. And I think that we need to start discussing it as such. We have Hindu supremacists who were born and raised on US soil. They are particularly going after, again, religious minorities, as defined in the Indian context, but as existing in the United States context. And they are particularly vociferous in their attempts to silence academic discourse. That is unwelcome at any time, at any place. And it is especially unacceptable in the United States, where we pride ourselves on freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
I'll be coming to that again about how this is happening more and more in the US and the campaign against you. Have you compared notes with other women academics or even women in general who are in the public eye? And have they also been getting more or less similar kind of attacks?
So yes, we do compare notes. We offer each other support and solidarity a lot, some publicly and some behind the scenes. The hate can differ in terms as dictated by the precise target. So for example, I am called a colonialist because I'm white. My colleagues who are of South Asian descent are called sepoys because they're brown, right? The hate is the same. The exact terminology is what shifts. Being of a particular race, ethnic background, religion, or even sex, none of that will save you from the ire and wrath of Hindutva. One thing that's happened in the last really 6 months, 6 months, even a little bit less, has been a bit more organization on the academic side. And basically coming out of March and April, in which I received, even for me, an unprecedented number of attacks and trollings, open attempts to influence the New Jersey state government and the Rutgers administration, all of that being highly, highly inappropriate. Coming out of that, and many people got caught up and also received hate, a number of us organized, and we formed the South Asia Scholar Activist Collective. And our twin pillars are a belief in humanities scholarship and an adherence to inclusive, progressive politics. So we like knowledge and we like diversity, right? We want to create room for everyone. And our first thing that we've done is we've published the Hindutva Harassment Field Manual, which is specifically aimed at people in North American settings, targets students, allies, and administrators who sort of wake up one day and their inboxes are full of these emails alleging all kinds of horrible things against a professor. And this is a manual to help them make sense of where this prejudice is coming from.
Especially those who may not have that same kind of experience or knowledge, or as many of them might be taken by surprise because they may be new to this kind of thing. Now, you are one of those, and there may be others, but I do follow you. You're one of those who talks about it quite openly on your social media platform, especially on Twitter, because it's a form of standing up for them, and that must really be upsetting a lot of people who say, let's go after her because she stands up and she openly says the kind of terrible messages she's received, threats to you, your family, etc. So is this a deliberate way of dealing with it, to kind of come out and be a little proactive publicly?
I would say so, yes. I am aware that Hindu nationalists, like many nationalist and supremacist groups and ideologies, the only thing that they hate worse than a woman who speaks up is a woman who fights back. And I refuse to suffer in silence. I refuse to feel shame about being the target of attacks, especially the sexualized attacks on me, which are very robust. It's very hard stuff to read. The one reason why people go for that, in addition to misogyny, is that our shared culture dictates that women should feel shame about that. And I think that's wrong. That's part of the problem. I also share the hate mail, and I should say I don't share most of it, and I only share tidbits. If I shared all of it, there would be nothing but that on my Twitter feed. But I also share it to show people, to show them what I'm facing, right? This is not scholars crying wolf. Hindu nationalists in the US are crying wolf about a whole lot of things right now. But on my side, we're not. We're really getting death threats. We really are getting threats of violence and threats of rape. People have threatened to rape my children, who are 3, 5, and 7 years old. The depravity that goes into that, I cannot even put into words. And so I want to show everyone in the full light of day what Hindu nationalism is, what their intimidation tactics look like, both coming from India and from the United States and other Western nations.
So do you think that these guys get tacit support, monetary or otherwise, from India? Do you think that they coordinate with their Indian counterparts? Or is it just suddenly that they have suddenly discovered that, they can threaten you in your home country, in your own country in certain ways? I mean, do you think that this is kind of a overall plan to intimidate, and the moment something happens here, something happens there?
I don't think I'm very comfortable speaking in general terms about that. In specific instances, maybe we can see documented sort of coordination of that sort, but I would need more specifics to comment on that.
One of the things you have said frequently is that you have studied original documents in Sanskrit and, if I'm not mistaken, Persian, and that you are perfectly knowledgeable about these things, and you have gone and looked at these things, which is far more than they have done. They may not have even read your books, frankly. So that should shut them up. I mean, that's a very strong logical argument. I'm using the word logical, which does not apply here.
Well, again, if we were all convinced by logic, it reminds me one of the letters that came out yesterday or the day before, dealing with this upcoming Dismantling Global Hindutva conference. This was a pushback letter from some Hindu right-wing groups. And they had a shloka in Sanskrit at the end, and they got it wrong. The transliteration is wrong. And this is like a real common Sanskrit shloka. Like, all you had to do was Google it, people. Anyways, there is immense ignorance on the part of Hindu nationalists. And this is something that I think is important to highlight, because it's people like them that want to keep everyone else ignorant about Hinduism and about South Asian history. And it's people like me who are trying to educate folks, especially for US-based groups that claim to be representing the interests of Hindu Americans here. Let me say this to you all, and especially to your supporters, very clearly. You should be allying with people like me. I am the one who is in the classroom teaching students from diverse backgrounds about the vast range of Hindu traditions and how incredible it is and how the religion has changed over time and its sheer and immense and amazing diversity. I am the one who's lecturing tomorrow on the Indus Valley civilization. And we will march forward in that class, ending 4,000 years later with the Vijayanagara Empire and the founding of Sikhism. If you really care about educating an American public about Indian and Hindu traditions, academics are your allies. And if the leaders of your alleged Hindu American communities and groups are telling you otherwise, Folks, they're lying to you. They are using you to advance hateful politics, not your interests.
Well, we know what happens to these diaspora communities, especially of certain ilk. They make a lot of money. They think they can buy influence, and they think they can, they're kind of, and they've not really shed India behind. And they're big supporters of the present dispensation of Narendra Modi. You saw the reception he got. And in fact, as you will know, that there are a lot of Hindus, professionals in the United States who are not inclined towards Hindutva. And they just haven't been able to have these kind of coordinated responses, except for this new dismantling Global Hindutva conference, which also people cried off. Universities backed out, all kinds of people.
So I would correct you on that. No, there has been no one has pulled out as a sponsor for that conference.
Okay, so I read this somewhere, but I stand corrected. But
the disinformation campaigns are very robust.
Yeah. Why have the seculars, so to speak, not been able to coordinate and stand up to this?
The secular whom?
Secular Hindu elements in the United States, the non-Hindutva elements, why do they not have, if not similar, but at least something equally robust in terms of standing up?
Well, I think some of them have, right? So Hindus for Human Rights and Sadhana have both stood up. Sahid, Students Against Hindutva Ideology, has certainly stood up. We have a number of scholarly collectives that are made up primarily of scholars of South Asian descent, including SASIC, the South Asia Scholar Activist Collective, of which I'm a part. They've all stood up. In terms of the more general public, I think you'd have to ask them, but I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't think they much care. I think that the majority of Hindu Americans really care more about what's going on here than what's going on back in India. And maybe they have views on politics back at home, maybe they don't. But I really think that for most of them, their eyes are focused here. And I don't think that it is incumbent on every Hindu American to stand up and say, not in my name. But I do think that many of them probably want to, at least some people probably want to be aware that hate is being perpetrated in your name, in the name of all Hindu Americans. And that's not by me. That's by the people claiming to be leaders in your community. And for that, you have my sympathy and my empathy. That is a terrible position to be in.
What was the essence? You said that your first book did not excite too much comment, except for a stray line which lasted for a few days. But what was the essence of your book on Aurangzeb, and that really, really got them started?
So I should say, the Aurangzeb book had sort of two basic receptions. The scholarly reception was somewhere between, oh, this is useful for teaching, and meh. Much of the book, really the entire book, was not surprising to scholars. One way to think about the Aurangzeb book was that it was an attempt to translate, a few decades of scholarly advances to a more public audience. So my fellow Mughalists were not surprised by what was in it. This was very normal and standard for them. The popular reception was something else. And what set people off, I think, is that I did what historians do. I set out to investigate the past and not to judge it. And I provided a picture of Aurangzeb that doesn't make him out to be evil, and it doesn't make him out to be a saint. In fact, it doesn't use that dichotomy at all. It presents him as a historical figure in his own time and place. That is historical method 101. Like any grad student in a history department learns that on day one if they don't know that going in. But I think that that's threatening to Hindu nationalism, because Hindu nationalists rely so heavily on this mythology of the past and this idea that there was this dark age where India's Muslim rulers subjugated Hindus. And it's not true. That's not how it worked. And it's not that it's the opposite, that India's Muslim rulers loved Hindus and everything was great and everyone, sat in a circle singing Kumbaya around a campfire. That is not the case either. Rather, we have to get it out of this paradigm of whether India's Muslim rulers were good or bad for Hindus, and we have to use other kinds of terminology and other kinds of metrics. That takes the wind out of the sails of Hindu nationalists. That means that when they set out and they lynch yet another Muslim on the streets of India, they have absolutely nothing, not even the veneer of making up for invented atrocities in the past to attempt to justify their unjustifiable violence. They're just left with what they are, a bunch of thugs.
Yeah. We'll be right back after this short break.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into A Show About Crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. So, I read your chapter, which you had to censor for the Indian public on Shivaji. And I can understand why you had to do it, but it was largely, in my reading, unexceptional. It wasn't anything incendiary, and yet you had to take into account what the Indian laws are and what the current mood is. Is that how it worked? And now, but it's online, so anyone wants to read it, they can.
That is true. So I published the Aurangzeb book in 3 separate editions in the United States, India, and Pakistan. The chapter on Shivaji is uncensored in both the United States and in Pakistan. So it's only India, folks. The entire rest of the world has access to standard, well-accepted scholarly facts about Shivaji, except y'all. That is not because scholars like me are unwilling to talk about it, and your own scholars in India are willing to talk about it too. It's that you have laws that prevent us from doing so. No scholar wants to censor their own work. That was a very difficult decision, but it was that or not publish it. And I decided 2 things. That one, because the book was about Aurangzeb and not Shivaji, that taking out historical information about Shivaji was the lesser sin. Number 1 and number 2, I decided that as my penance for a decision I didn't want to make, because I think censorship is horrific and a terrible thing, that I would talk about it, right? And so I've talked about it many times, I've written about it, so on and so forth. But just to circle back and sort of close this out, in terms of Indian laws, so obviously I'm compelled to follow the laws of the place where I publish. That doesn't mean that those laws are just. They are highly unjust. And folks, if you don't know the history of laws concerning religious offense in India, you might want to look into it. These laws were put in place by your former colonial masters because they thought that you couldn't handle the kinds of critical discourse that Westerners could. And if that sounds really racist and really offensive to you, good. You understand it was racist and it was offensive. Those laws should really be rethought.
You know, many non-Hindutva scholars in India and others have criticized some of your works, some of your language, and even there were sentences you used in something which the historian you quoted said he had never said that. So is it that sometimes the language is the problem?
Okay, so without specifics, that's going to be hard for me to comment on. But sure, scholars can disagree on language all the time. This comes up a lot regarding especially terminology and translation. Right? Those are the 2 big issues, at least in my work, that this tends to arise. In terms of terminology, right? I mean, scholars get really attached to specialist language, and I don't. So there's often disagreeing points of view on that. Translation, it all depends on your theory of translation, and those are all over the map. I would point out to folks that scholars disagreeing is as normal as, fish swimming in water. That's like what we do. We disagree all the time. We don't have unity. We don't have ideological unity. Certainly, I mean that would destroy the whole point of the game of scholarship. So, folks, feel free to criticize my work. I love criticism. All right, I just like legitimate criticism. And if you want to criticize my translations, you should know the language from which I'm translating from. Otherwise, you sound ignorant.
No, but you don't think that language itself, your use of certain terminology may be upsetting them more than the content.
Sure. Like I said, without specifics, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but yeah, sure.
Anyway, it's all over the place. Anyone who wants to, they can read it. But now tell me, Hindu groups, who are obviously right-wing Hindu groups, say that there is a campaign to discredit them and that, they find it offensive that, journalists, activists, and scholars go after Hindus. And then there is not a conspiracy, but at least certainly a campaign, and they are at the receiving end while they are, say, model citizens in the United States, for example. And that's a point of view. I mean, so don't you think that it's, minus the violence and the threats, it's a legitimate point of view to imagine that?
As a matter of fiction, not as a matter of reality. If you want to know who is going after Hindus, it is the Hindu nationalist groups. It's the Hindu right. Take the attacks on the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference that's coming up starting in 2 days. A huge number of people who are organizing that conference, who are speaking at it, are Hindu. They are being attacked by Hindu nationalists. So far as model citizens, I mean, that terminology has been highly criticized, and justly so in the US context. But folks, like, if I can just speak to my fellow Americans for a moment, no matter what your religious background is, this is supposed to be the land of freedom. All right, it often isn't that. But our higher values dictate freedom of speech and critical thoughts. All right, you are not modeling anything but hate and bigotry when you try to shut down reasonable academic discourse. It is also a very un-American value to try to put on this sort of fragility. Like, oh, I can't be criticized. Folks, politics is fair to criticize. Religion is too, by the way. It's not polite necessarily, but you can criticize each other's religions. That's fine. But folks, when we criticize Hindu nationalism, it's not criticizing Hinduism. And I think that that lie is shown very powerfully in the retaliatory attacks against many of my colleagues, many of my fellow scholars and academics who are Hindu. You are the ones attacking them.
There was a petition against you from the students of Rutgers asking that you be dismissed, if I'm not mistaken. And the university stood by you, which is a great blow to protect freedom of expression, freedom of thought, and all the American values and the values that should be with everybody, really, in every country. But at the same time, invited students to come and represent their case and hold a dialogue. So in that sense, you got support, full-fledged support. I read about it also in your own tweets, and you said this is not going anywhere, don't bother. But the university felt that perhaps they needed to talk to people. So this is by secondary reading, so I can't claim primary sources. But the university is aware that it needs to kind of mollify or tell the students or tell Hindus in general that, look, we may have these kind of academics who are doing a good job on their own. We don't interfere, but we are not here to offend anybody. So that's a kind of adjustment they made. Did you feel that it was the right thing?
So let me clarify first that petition was not started by students at Rutgers. And
okay, that came
we know that because the students at Rutgers, New Brunswick, which is not my campus, I teach at Rutgers Newark, the couple of students at Rutgers New Brunswick who appear to have pushed this went on a podcast and told everyone that it was an outside influence. The petition also repeated, I would call it plagiarism if you turned it into my course, parts of an earlier petition that again was external from the Rutgers community. No student who has ever been in my class at any point, as far as I know, participated in any of that pushback. It is true that there ended up being a small group of students all but one of them, so far as I know, at Rutgers, New Brunswick, again, not my campus, who did have objections. There's an internal dynamic there. The New Brunswick campus loves to try to tell us up in Newark what to do. We really don't appreciate that, folks. Like, we're all fine in Newark. Please leave us alone. In any case, look, what the administration did, they did. I am very grateful for their support. And insofar as they want to hold dialogues with Hindu student groups, I think that's fantastic. Of course, our administration should be doing that. And American universities are big, complex places. And there's lots of places for Hindu students to go. We have a Hindu chaplain in New Brunswick, DePaul. He and I chat sometimes. He can provide certain kinds of support and spiritual guidance that obviously I can't. Like, I do not do spiritual guidance of any sort, right? Students they have student groups and they're free to do whatever they want. They can celebrate holidays, they can do outreach, they can organize their own conferences. All of that is great. I would argue that what I do at Rutgers, especially in my capacity as a professor who teaches, it's something that's sort of parallel but different. I'm not doing interfaith work. I'm not doing community building. I'm doing education, right? And I'm specifically helping to cultivate religious literacy and historical literacy as well.
And my original question was, did you think the university handled it overall in a balanced kind of way?
I don't know that my opinion on this is particularly useful. I think my administration should do what they want to do, and their obligation to me is to support academic freedom and and that's not to me like because I'm special, but to all of their professors. And I think that they have done that, and I'm grateful for their support. My administration has been and continues to be very helpful in facing the violent threats. I am sorry to the Rutgers Police Department. You all have a lot of work in this regard over the last several months. And I think that other parts of the administration and what they do, that's really not my thing to comment on.
Have you offered to meet any Hindu groups to explain personally face to face?
Oh, sure. I did an event, I want to say in April. I think it was in April with Sadhana, which is a US-based Hindu group, and specifically sort of like within the Hindu faith tradition. And we did a whole little thing on teaching Hinduism, specifically concerning the insider-outsider debate, which is a classic sort of dichotomy that we use and criticize in the teaching of religious studies. Some people are insiders to traditions, some people are outsiders. But if you think about it a little bit more, it's not quite that simple. And then you can talk about positionality and different views. Obviously, I'm an outsider to Hinduism. That's very clear to, I think, everyone. And so we talked about that and what that looks like. I teach students who are also outsiders. I also teach students who are insiders and who identify as Hindu. And what does that look like in the classroom?
All this must have had an impact, Audrey. What do you plan to do? Get off Twitter? Maybe it's a terrible question to ask an academic or even a writer, perhaps temper some of your work or your language, be a little more, open-minded to welcome people from criticizing you in a genuine way. What do you plan to do? All this, has it had an impact? Is the attacks on your children, has it shaken you? And are you going to react to it in some way?
So I would say I'm very open to genuine criticism. And for folks who think I'm not, you're just not hanging out in the right spaces, right? Academics criticize each other in writing, usually in peer-reviewed writing. We criticize each other at conferences. I actually criticize myself all the time at academic events. So if you're missing that, you're just listening in the wrong places. Has it impacted me? Of course. It's caused immense stress in my life. It creates uncertainty for me and my family. We take certain precautions. We look around a lot more and make sure people aren't following us and things of that sort. It has taken a huge toll. No one should have to pay the price that I have had to pay. And that is part of why I won't stop. I'm not going to get off Twitter. I'm not going to moderate, right? I'm not going to kowtow. So insofar as the goal of the Hindu supremacists who are attacking me is to try to to influence me in this way, I suggest y'all look for another target or just stop, because it's not going to work. Okay. The other reason why I will not stop, I will not moderate my speech, and I certainly will not moderate my scholarly opinions, is that it would be unethical. I can't do that, right? My allegiances are not, let me put this another way. My job isn't to make you all happy. My job isn't to tell you what you want to hear. And it's certainly not to tell you that your prejudices are okay, right? My job is to offer critical thought as a scholar, and I intend to do that to the fullest extent possible. And I hope to have a long career too.
Yeah, so long career helped me segue into the last question. What's your next project, and will it bring you to India? And are you planning to visit?
So I'm currently working on two projects. The smaller project is that I am doing research on the Hindu right and Hindu supremacist groups in the United States. And I'm currently being sued by one of those groups, which has provided a very interesting positionality on the entire research project. Front row seat in a way that I've never had when I'm studying, say, the Mughal Empire. I've spent my whole career with distance being the issue, and now proximity is the issue. The bigger project that I'm working on, and I intend to get going again very strong on that soon, is my fourth book, which will be a single volume overview history of India or South Asia, depending on your preferred terminology, from about 4,600 years ago, the Indus Valley civilization, into the present day. And that book is already under contract with Princeton University Press, and I will be writing it with the support of a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So I'm really excited about that. You know, it'll take a few years, maybe several years for it to come out. In terms of travel to India, let me put it this way. I intend on traveling to South Asia to do research on the book.
So are you saying you won't travel to India? You'll be prevented from travel to India? You'll face obstacles?
I don't think that me traveling to India would be safe right now.
Okay.
And
so
that is really sad and unfortunate.
Yeah, well, that's strongly put. We understand that. So that was Professor Audrey Truschke of Rutgers University, author of several books, including the very controversial book on Aurangzeb, which is actually quite a good read if you want to get down to it. I read it some years ago, but now I'm planning to reread some portions. Specific portions, and talking about the hate she's received from Hindu supremacist groups, Hindu nationalist groups in the United States, pro-Hindutva groups, and how she's going to continue carrying on her tradition of being on Twitter, doing her research, and speaking publicly her mind and her work. Thank you very much, Audrey. And I hope this ceases at some stage and they tire out, because if you're going on and on about it and you are standing up to it, I don't think anyone can. Somebody's got to blink, and it won't be you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Join us again next week for another episode and another guest in the Wire Talks. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey, everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On a show about crypto, Rohan Joshi asked the question, what is an altcoin, to Akshay Agarwal? Tune in to find out. Did you know consuming pornography in the privacy of your home is constitutional, but sending sleazy messages to other people is not? On the longest constitution, Priya shares some facts about explicit material. On FinTalks, Pratik Mehta, co-founder of Scriptbox, and upwardly talks to Akhil Handa about selling upwardly to Scriptbox. On AudioGyan, Kedar and Abhineet ask Vandana Abraham, design head at Altasian, about her experience working at MNCs. And on Yuddha, Anirudh and Aditya talk about Babur's finest hour at the First Battle of Panipat. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of the shows on the IVM network for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really appreciate that. And finally, I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Ciat Cred, Banco Baroda, Quarter, and CoinSwitch Bear. We really do appreciate the support.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.